What is up, ladies and gents? You know what time of day it is. It's XCN time, and in today's video we're going to be talking all about XCN. We're going to be discussing what we are seeing here on the price charts, some recent developments here for crypto, as well as my price targets for XCN over the coming days and 2025. So be sure to stay tuned for all of that. Of course, if you are a new viewer, then welcome to this channel. If you do like this content, hit the like button and subscribe for more. If you are a returning viewer, as always, welcome back to this channel. It's great to have you all here. So of course, diving straight into this video, and the first thing that I want to touch on here is the thing that is coming out later today. Of course, on Onyxcoin, just looking at the price charts briefly, what we are seeing here on Onyxcoin is this sort of structure. You can see the prices are teasing with this upper trend line here. And if this news turns out to be good, this could be enough to kickstart something more bullish here in this chart. Of course, that news we are about to see is in fact the Fed meeting minutes. That's coming out later today at my time. That's 7 p.m. That's 2 p.m. Eastern time and 5 p.m. UTC. So the minutes that are coming out later today are for the meeting that occurred on March the 19th and 20th. And basically what a lot of us are going to be looking for in these minutes is what the general consensus is regarding the interest rates and the cuts that are planned for 2025. Now, of course, the first thing to note about this is that it's not going to take into account this recent price action that we've seen with the tariffs. Of course, just for reference, this is the stock market, and this was the crash that we saw after the worldwide tariffs were announced. But unfortunately, that did occur after this Fed meeting. So we're not going to hear about that in this. What we are going to hear, what everyone else thinks is the correct solution for the interest rate cuts. Now, of course, for us Onyxcoin holders, this is going to be very important because as a risk asset here in crypto, we are going to do extremely well when there's more liquidity in the markets. The more liquidity there is, the more money is flowing into risk assets such as crypto, and that's going to be extremely bullish for us. In fact, if you're invested in other coins here as well, it's also going to be bullish for those coins. Now, of course, in the original meeting, there was expectation that there was going to be 3 rate cuts in 2025. And if we have a look at Polymarket, that's what most people here are expecting. However, the expectation has now slightly increased. As you can see, 4 rate cuts here has now an 18% chance according to Polymarket. Of course, this is quite a good reference for what the market expectation is for rate cuts in 2025. And if you have a look at the red line here, which is 4 interest rate cuts, we've seen that massively increase. Obviously, back in mid-February, we only saw the 7% chance of 4 rate cuts in 2025. However, now that percentage has increased to near 20%. So people are factoring more and more rate cuts. So this is quite important because the expectation is now more rate cuts. So from these minutes, we're going to hear from the rest of the committee their opinions on the rate cuts. How many rate cuts should we have in 2025, and how soon should we start cutting the rates? Of course, if more people on this committee are, kind of supporting the idea of more than 3 rate cuts, or starting the rate cuts sooner than, say, June 2025, for example, then that could be really, really bullish for the markets. Of course, we know that this is sort of the expectation now. So I would say that if there is no change, there's only 3 rate cuts planned, for example, then that could be slightly bearish, considering that up to 18% of people consider 4 rate cuts in 2025, and 15% are still thinking 8 or more. So we're going to find out in roughly 2 hours what effect this has on the markets. If I had to guess the outcome from these minutes, I think it will be slightly bearish for the markets, just for the fact that it's not going to take into account the recent tariff news. It might disappoint some investors. And of course, we know that the tone from the previous meeting was a little bit more cautious, less dovish, and just more cautious about the tariffs that were happening. So maybe it kind of exacerbates the current situation. Of course, I'm hoping for the best for us and XCN holders. But yeah, just based on the fact that this is the minutes from a meeting in the past, makes me think that we are going to see a slight dip. Of course, tomorrow as well, we are going to see the inflation rate data come out at 1:30 p.m. my time. So that's 8:30 morning in Eastern time. And of course, it's going to have quite a big impact on the markets as well. Basically, if the inflation rate data comes in better than expected, so it comes lower than these targets here, the forecast and the consensus columns, then that's going to be very bullish for the markets. If it doesn't, if it comes up higher, then that's going to be very, very bearish, because obviously this directly impacts the interest rate setting from the Fed. So this is going to be important to watch out for, particularly if you are a short-term trader here on Onyxcoin as well. Of course, we are going to see what impact this Fed minutes has in about 2 hours time here in the markets. Of course, I'm hoping for the best possible outcome here for us XCN holders. But now onto the price charts and just discussing where we are. And guys, the first thing I notice here about XCN, I'm just going to get all the annotations back on. The first thing you notice about XCN is the relative strength we are starting to see in this area. I've been personally impressed with the price action we've seen from XCN since April, really, when we started hearing this tariff news kind of explode. Because if you pay attention to this area, look how it differs in different cryptocurrencies. Let's talk about Bitcoin, for example. Of course, Bitcoin, if you still compare it to the stock market, it's doing well, but we've still seen quite a bit of a drop here in the Bitcoin price. You know, we've seen this 10% drop to the downside. And if you compare that with XCN, XCN has held up still pretty well when you compare its size. It's a much smaller cryptocurrency. And so this to me tells me that we're starting to see relative strength come back to XCN. We're not seeing XCN performing as badly. We are seeing XCN perform better than other cryptocurrencies during this dip. Of course, we can have a look at other cryptocurrencies as well. Let's take, what other good example do we have, guys? Let's take XRP as an example, and you can see here that in the same time frame that XCN was basically bottoming out, we saw this price action here on XRP. Now, XRP actually dropped a whole 25% on the news. So XRP has performed far worse than XCN has here in the same time frame. Let's have a look at another coin, XDC, another one that we used to cover on this channel quite a bit. XDC, once again, although it's still performed fairly decently compared to XRP, we've still seen a larger drop in XDC than we have seen here in XCN. So this is quite an observation, because normally we expect to see larger cap cryptos perform better when the markets are down. So it's quite interesting to see that now XCN, the smaller cap cryptos compared to the other two that I showed you, is actually performing the best during this dip. And it just goes to show me that selling pressure here on XCN is really, really running out. Of course, we've seen that already, because the MACD has hinted to us that despite the prices heading in this downwards direction, we've seen an increase in bullish momentum. We've seen the MACD lines pointing in this direction. We've seen a bullish crossover since the 14th of March there, with a small interruption at the start of April. And of course, this sort of setup here is a massive bullish divergence when we see the price dipping, but the momentum building. This tells us that in the future, we should be seeing a trend reversal. I think all we really need here to see a new bullish trend here on All we really need to see here on XCN for a new bullish trend to emerge is an increase in trading volume. That's the only ingredient left to the recipe that could make us start on a new bullish trend. Of course, at this current point in time, we're still struggling with this trading volume down here, which is still declining, unfortunately. But some bullish news events, like say, for example, a really bullish Fed's minutes coming out later today, or a really good inflation rate reading tomorrow, could be enough to really kickstart things here on XCN. Of course, if something bullish happens where we start to see a breakout to the upside, something like this over the next few days, for example, then we could potentially see prices head to 2.5 cents fairly quickly here on XCN. Now, the reason for that price target is the fact that if we have a look at these two trend lines here, the ones keeping us in this downtrend, if we break out to the upside, we could be looking at a potential breakout from this falling wedge pattern, which is what it is when the two trend lines are closing into each other and facing the same direction. Of course, the price target we'd be looking at here on XCN is this distance between the first test of support to the first test of resistance. We drag that to where we see the breakout, and this is our price target here, just short of 2.5 cents. So of course, any potential breakout to the upside could result in a quick pump here, in my opinion, to this sort of price level. Now, of course, a successful breakout here means that we see some sort of increase in trading volume down here, as well as prices heading up quite quickly. So not the sort of price action that we've been seeing over the past few days. Unfortunately, there's just been no trading volume for these potential breakouts here, so they have failed. But if we start to see a huge increase in trading volume as the prices break past this resistance, that could be enough, in my opinion, to send it straight back up to roughly this level. Now, of course, looking a little bit longer term here on XCN in 2025, my personal price targets here for XCN still lie along these fib levels. Of course, we use the fib levels to predict our price target here in XCN because we know XCN loves these fib levels. We can see, for example, that the price has tested them as supports and resistances throughout its trading history. You can see that most recently, we've literally come down to the 0.382 fib, which lies at 0.75 cents, and we've bounced off from this level. So once again, we've been demonstrated to that XCN loves these price levels. And so I'm using these fibs quite religiously at the moment to kind of guide us where we're going to be going. And in 2025, my personal price targets lie between the 0.1414 fib. I really like this one as a price target because it lines up with the previous all-time high here on XCN, which sits at roughly 18 cents, as well as the 1.618 fib here, which is a very well-respected fib, the golden Fibonacci level there, and that currently sits at roughly 32 cents. So my price target for 2025 is either this first level here. If we continue that shooting past this level, then we could be seeing 32 cents in 2025. Now, of course, I don't expect that to come anytime soon. We need to see the correct environment here in crypto, which means that we need to see greed and extreme greed here in the crypto markets. Bitcoin, XRP making new all-time highs, that sort of thing, before we start to see XCN really flourish. So those are my longer term targets here. Obviously, I've given you my shorter term target, which is still roughly the 2.5 cents region, and I've given you guys the conditions that we need to see it. Now, at the end of the day, we're going to see what happens with all this tariff news. We're going to wait for that to blow over. I do think we are going to see a rally in the markets come very soon. I do think the worst of the tariff news is almost over. And so, yeah, I'm very optimistic to see what happens here with XCN. Of course, that's what I really wanted to say in this video. If you are holding your XCN but you're not yet staking it, make sure you check out this video on how to stake your XCN, because you can pretty much earn free passive income just for stake the XCN you are holding anyway. So be sure to check that out. It should pop up on your screen. Otherwise, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in my next video.